So during quarantine, I've been trying to slowly watch through all of the Dreamworks animation films with my kids. So today we're going to stop and rank all 5 Dreamworks Animation's theatrical movie franchises from the worst to the best. My name is Sean and I started this channel because I was driving everyone around me crazy talking about movies way too much. If you can relate, you're probably in the right place to consider clicking that subscribe button. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of the 5 Dreamworks Animation theatrical franchises. What I mean by that is that there's more than one movie, so we got at least 2 movies, and they were theatrically released. I know some of the Dreamworks projects have direct-to-video sequels, or they have TV shows that followed. For the sake of this video, I'm just looking at the theatrically released franchises, and let's get started. Easily coming in last place for me is the Trolls franchise. I find both of these movies to be pretty ill-conceived at their core, off-putting in regards to both the premises as well as the execution, and the focus on farting glitter and pooping out cupcakes. Not my cup of tea. But they're also jam-packed with really catchy music and infectious characters. So, when it comes to the first movie, the basic premise is that you have these happy-go-lucky trolls that are fleeing from their lives because the Bergen like to eat them alive. Charming. The Bergen also can't find any happiness if they don't eat trolls alive. Great little message there for the kids. I mean, as you go into it, Justin Timberlake's character doesn't sing anymore because the last time he sang, he got his grandmother killed. I mean, there's just so many just weird, gross plot points for a kid's movie where you're trying to think, whoever would be amused by all the farting of glitter, these really aren't the best plot points and ways to tackle these topics and themes for that age range. So this movie has always been really off-putting to me. But once again, the music to it is great. And so the soundtrack to it was kind of on loop in my house in the year 2017. My daughter even has a Trolls karaoke machine with all the songs preloaded in it. That brings us to Trolls World Tour. Its basic concept about the tribes, the 6 strings, and Poppy's rise into leadership should be a setup for a really wild, goofy, epic journey. But instead of being a fun send-up of epic journeys, kind of turns into an oddly preachy film that can't quite get its message straight. Like right out of the gate, it makes it clear that the movie wants to be about unity, bringing people together, and overcoming of our differences. And the very next scene establishes people that are different from you are dangerous, which is a conflicting message and kind of a strange thing to put in a movie that's targeting children so young. Beyond that, I'm not really sure that a movie that involves a creature that poops out cupcakes when it gets scared is the best place to send a very serious message about unity. With so much going on, the movie can't figure out its own messaging, so you get to the end of the film, it's all about unifying and not breaking up into different groups over their differences, and the very next thing they do after that is that Poppy and Barb form a girls group. Like, the movie just does not know what it's about. It tries everything, fails at everything, and that's what both of these movies felt like to me. But the music is really catchy. In 4th place is Madagascar. To be clear, I think that this is a significantly better franchise than the Trolls series, and some of the movies in here I thought were quite good. At its core, you have a fun premise about a bunch of zoo animals heading off to Madagascar, and then hijinks ensue. And I think that's a little bit of the problem for me with this franchise, is that for too many of the movies, it seemed to put the hijinks ahead of story and character and emotion. And so while there's a bunch of wild, crazy, zany things that happen, whether they're traveling the world or penguins turning into spies, they don't all have kind of that emotional core to them that I think makes for the best of family movies. My favorite of the bunch is the second one, and that is because it does tie a lot more into a character's origin, his family heritage, responsibility, expectations, and just stepping up and showing someone has value in what they've learned to do, and people finding commonality between all of that while still having all sorts of wild hijinks about them jumping in a plane that gets slingshotted across Africa. My least favorite of the bunch was Penguins of Madagascar. I just thought it was a very strange spin-off to do with this franchise, to go full-blown spy movie as an offshoot of the previous films in the series was weird. It felt like they watched Despicable Me and they went, hey, we could do something like that too, especially as you kind of moved into the third act of it. Very reminiscent in certain things, the types of gags and schemes that we saw in the Despicable Me movies. So I just didn't particularly care for that one. In general, these are fun enough, light entertainment, but not necessarily ones that made a big impact on me because there was such a focus on silliness over story. Real quick before I give you my top 3, be sure to share your ranking down below in the comment section. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. Also, if you don't know, I've talked about a bunch of these Dreamworks franchises before right up here. How to Train Your Dragon, Shrek, Kung Fu Panda, Madagascar. I talk about each of the films individually in one of these rankings right up there. If you've enjoyed this video, there's definitely something there that you'll enjoy. In third place is the Shrek franchise. This is one that's frustrating because it has really high highs and pretty low lows and everything kind of in between. At its core, you have a really clever twist on all of these fairy tales and the tropes that go along with them. And especially in those first 2 movies, there was just a lot of wit in how it tackled that source material. It subverts your expectations in the good way. We're so familiar with all of these stories and fairy tales that every time you think you're about to get the cliche, does a twist, a turn, and a punchline, an actual joke that builds off of our knowledge of these fairy tales in just a really sharp, clever way. But as you moved into the third one, for whatever reason, it got really stale and it felt like them trying to recapture the magic and the energy without any of the wit. They repeated the beats, they repeated the references, but without that sharpness, without the actual punchline to the joke or some commentary on the genre. So it just kind of felt hard, flat on its face. Then with the fourth one, did a pretty good return to form. Certainly not to the heights of the first 2, but it found a way to kind of re-explore the franchise, had a new villain in there, see the world, how it could have been different, going back to that original love story. So kind of recapturing some of the magic just a little bit. And actually had a pretty good time with Puss in Boots, where they take Antonio Banderas' take on Puss in Boots and send him on his own little swashbuckling adventure that it's not necessarily trying to be the home run that is the first 2 movies. It's just trying to be this breezy, fun adventure, and it absolutely delivers on doing that it has the humor, it has the adventure, it has the swords play, and then, of course, a great voice talent along with it. So this is one of these franchises that is frustrating because it's so inconsistent in quality. Our runner-up is Kung Fu Panda. Now, I only watched these for the first time just a few months back, and I was immediately blown away by the franchise. I assumed because it has such a silly premise that it was going to be aiming for a much younger age demographic than I fall into, and that my kids would love it and I would be okay with it. But I was immediately impressed by the fact that the movie manages to balance silly premise about a panda learning kung fu with actual human emotion, character arcs, and actual stakes. There's a villain trying to do something and it finds a creative way to kind of give him a backstory that you care about. It actually does hero's journey type stuff with our characters, and you see the journey of this person that's trying to live up to this thing that he's been chosen for while everyone is looking down on him. Then we move into the second movie, and it finds a way to keep digging into his backstory even further. I love origin stories, so anytime you can kind of tell that story of becoming, I eat that stuff up. And this one dives into it even more so than the first movie does and ties the villain to that origin story so you care about what he's doing. And once again, there's stakes, there's dynamics to it. And building off the first film, there's kind of a team dynamic to it. Then in the third movie, easily the weakest of the bunch for me. There's not quite that magic, but it's not a dud by any means. It's still a good movie, just doesn't quite have that spark to it. And while they do bring Poe's dad into it, so it should have a little bit more of that weight emotionally, doesn't hit quite like it should, but in no ways does it like hurt the franchise at all or diminish the reputation. Still a solid film. So when you put it all together, this was a very pleasant surprise to see just how good these movies actually were and how much that they took themselves seriously while telling a silly story. But coming in first place is How to Train Your Dragon. This is a trilogy without a bad movie. In fact, the weakest of the bunch is still very, very good. And like the Kung Fu Panda films, what makes them work is that while they take what could be a bit of a silly premise, it plays it seriously. It doesn't dumb it down for the audience. It creates this fun world where dragons exist, and then it takes human emotions and it tells very human stories about responsibility, parental expectations, misunderstandings between parents, children, between generations, and it builds on each piece of it as the set of films goes along. And so then we bring the mother into it as we go along. We have Hiccup having to like go into leadership by the third film and make hard choices that have actual consequences. You see him grow up throughout the films, and it never really skips a beat. They find that human emotion. They find that character arc for him to keep expanding it. Whether you're viewing them as individual films or as a trilogy of films, there's an arc that he goes through, and it feels properly bookended by the time you get to the closing credits of the third film. It feels satisfying, like, yeah, that was a great journey to see Hiccup and Toothless go on together. So a lot of what makes this work also fantastic, phenomenal score. They're gorgeously animated, and there's just an escapism to this idea of what if you were a child that found a dragon that you got to ride on? And then you add to that, there's just that journey of him changing the culture of his people, where they were hunters of dragons to being the people that saved dragons, and all of it together. It's so satisfying at the end of each of these films. They all have big epic battles and something that stands out and makes them unique. So it's a trilogy without a weak link, with phenomenal music, great characters, great animation that satisfies from beginning to end. So it comes in at number 1. If you want to see my more in-depth thoughts on each of these movies, check out that playlist right over there. If you want to see my son's take on the Dreamworks Animation Franchises, check that one out there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies too much.